My name is Maren Holloway. I am 28 years old. When I was 22, I gave my father a piece of my liver. I did this because he told me he was dying, because my mother cried at the kitchen table and said, "Your father does not have much time." Because my brother sat in the corner with his head in his hands and said nothing. Because a doctor looked me in the eye and told me I was a match and that the surgery could save his life. I said yes without hesitation. I did not ask questions. I did not seek a second opinion. I did not research alternatives. My father was dying. The clock was ticking, and I was 22 years old and terrified and ready to give anything to keep him alive. The surgery was on March 14th, 2018. 9 hours. They removed approximately 35% of my liver and transplanted it into my father. The surgeons told me afterward that the procedure went well, that my liver would regenerate, that I would recover fully within 6 to 8 months. They were wrong about the recovery. The first 2 months were agony. I could not stand upright. I could not sleep on my side. I could not cough or sneeze or laugh without a searing pain across my right abdomen that felt like someone was pulling a zipper through my internal organs. The surgical scar was 11 inches long, a raised red line that curved from beneath my right breast to the center of my stomach. At 4 months, I developed a complication, a biliary stricture, a narrowing of the bile duct at the site where my liver had been cut. The fluid that was supposed to drain from my liver backed up. I turned yellow. I was readmitted to the hospital for a procedure to place a stent in the bile duct. They did this through my throat. I was awake for part of it. At 8 months, the physical wound had closed, but the pain had not stopped. My surgeon said some patients experience chronic post-surgical pain. It is a known complication of liver donation. Nerve damage along the incision line. It might improve. It might not. It did not. 6 years later, I still have pain. Every day. Some days it is a dull ache that I can ignore if I stay busy. Other days it is a sharp, stabbing sensation that stops me mid-step and makes me grip whatever is nearest until it passes. I cannot sleep on my right side. I cannot run. I cannot lift anything heavier than 20 pounds without triggering a flare. I gave my father 35% of my liver. I gave him 9 hours on an operating table. I gave him 8 months of recovery. I gave him 6 years of chronic pain. I gave him a scar that stretches across my body like a signature I never agreed to write. And he did not need any of it. 6 months ago, I found the truth. Hidden in a box in my mother's closet, medical records she forgot to destroy. Records that showed my father's condition was treatable with medication. A drug called ursodiol, $1,800 a month, not covered by insurance. Recommended by his doctor as the first-line treatment. My parents knew, my brother knew, the family doctor who referred me for the transplant evaluation knew. They all chose to let me go under the knife rather than pay for pills. Let me tell you about the family that decided my organ was cheaper than a prescription. Scranton, Pennsylvania. Lackawanna County, a mid-sized city in northeastern Pennsylvania known for coal mining history, harsh winters, and the kind of working-class resilience that runs through families like rebar through concrete. The Holloway family lived at 31 Maple Court in Dunmore, a borough just east of Scranton. A 3-bedroom ranch with a chain-link fence and a garage my father used as a workshop. The neighborhood was modest, blue-collar. The kind of street where people fixed their own cars and mowed their own lawns and knew each other's business without being asked. My father, Dennis Holloway, was a maintenance supervisor at Geisinger Community Medical Center. He had worked there for 23 years. He repaired hospital equipment, managed a small crew of technicians, and earned $59,000 a year. Good benefits, union job, stable. The irony of my father spending his career maintaining the equipment in a hospital while choosing to avoid using that hospital's own medical treatments is something I still cannot fully process. My mother, Gail Holloway, worked part-time at a flower shop on Main Street in Dunmore. She made $19,000 a year. She was warm, generous, and possessed an extraordinary ability to cry on command. I did not recognize this as a skill until much later. Combined household income, $78,000 a year. Comfortable by Scranton standards. Not wealthy. Not poor. The kind of income that covers the basics and leaves enough for an annual vacation to the Jersey Shore, and Christmas presents that were thoughtful if not extravagant. My brother Craig was 3 years older than me, 25 when the transplant happened. He worked as an HVAC technician. He made $41,000 a year. He was quiet, steady, and had the particular talent of being present in a room without being accountable for anything that happened in it. Craig knew what our parents were doing. I am certain of this now. He was in the room during every family discussion about my father's illness. He heard the options, he heard the costs, he heard our parents decide that my liver was cheaper than medication. And he sat in the corner and said nothing. I was born on July 12, 1996, the youngest, the daughter, the one whom my mother always said had a giving heart. A description I once took as a compliment. Now I understand it was a job description. Growing up as Marin Holloway was unremarkable in most ways. We were a functional, ordinary family that ate dinner together most nights and attended church on Easter and Christmas. My parents were not abusive in any traditional sense. They fed me, clothed me, educated me, and showed up to enough school events that nobody would have suspected anything was wrong. But there was a current beneath the surface, a quiet assumption that ran through every family decision. Craig was the practical one, the one who would build a career and support himself. I was the helpful one, the one who was expected to be available for babysitting my cousins on weekends, available for cooking dinner when mom worked late, available for driving grandma to her appointments, available for whatever the family needed whenever they needed it. Being available was my role, being available was my identity, and when my father needed a liver, being available nearly cost me my life. My father was diagnosed with primary biliary cholangitis in October 2017. He was 51 years old. PBC is a chronic liver disease in which the bile ducts in the liver are gradually destroyed, leading to bile buildup, liver damage, and eventually liver failure if untreated. The key word is untreated, because PBC is treatable. In most cases, it is managed effectively with medication. The first-line treatment is a drug called ursodioxycholic acid, commonly known as ursodiol. It slows the progression of the disease, reduces bile acid levels, and in many patients prevents the need for a transplant entirely. Ursodiol costs approximately $1,800 a month, without insurance. With insurance, the copay varies. Some plans cover it fully, some cover a portion, some do not cover it at all. My father's insurance through Geisinger did not cover ursodiol for PBC. A coverage gap, a bureaucratic decision made by an insurance formulary committee that determined the drug was not on their approved list for that specific diagnosis. $1,800 a month, $21,600 a year. That was the cost of keeping my father alive without surgery. My parents could not afford it. Or rather, they decided they could not afford it. $78,000 a year in combined income, $21,600 in medication costs. It would have consumed 28% of their gross income. Significant. Painful. But not impossible. Other options existed. Patient assistance programs through the drug manufacturer that could have reduced the cost. Appeals to the insurance company for coverage exceptions. Enrollment in clinical trials. Charitable foundations that help patients pay for liver disease medications. None of these options were pursued. I know this because the medical records I found show no evidence of any attempt to obtain ursodiol through any channel. No insurance appeal, no patient assistance application, no clinical trial enrollment. Nothing. Instead, my father's primary care physician, Dr. Howard Brill, referred him to a transplant center for evaluation, a referral that bypassed the standard treatment protocol for PBC and went directly to the most extreme intervention available. I did not know any of this when my parents sat me down at the kitchen table on November 12, 2017, and told me my father was dying. My mother did most of the talking. She cried, beautifully. The tears came at exactly the right moments. Her voice cracked in exactly the right places. She described my father's condition in terms designed to maximize fear and minimize understanding. Your father's liver is failing. The disease is aggressive. Without a transplant, he has maybe 6 months. The waiting list for a deceased donor liver is years long. A living donor is the only option. You might be a match, Marin. Would you be willing to be tested? I was 22. My father was sitting across from me, looking thin and tired and scared. My brother was in the corner with his head in his hands. My mother was crying. What was I supposed to say? No? Let my father die because I was afraid of surgery. Of course, I said. Of course I will be tested. I was tested the following week at the transplant center at Thomas Jefferson University Hospital in Philadelphia. Blood type, compatible. Liver volume adequate. Overall health excellent. I was a match. The transplant team at Jefferson explained the risks. Major surgery, 9 to 12 hours, 6 to 8 weeks of initial recovery. Potential complications, including bile leaks, infection, blood clots, and chronic pain. The mortality risk for a living liver donor was approximately 1 in 500. 1 in 500. A small number on paper. An enormous number when it is your body on the table. I signed the consent forms. Every page, every line. I signed because I trusted my parents, and I trusted the doctors. And I believed that without my liver, my father would die. Nobody told me about ursodiol. Nobody mentioned medication as an alternative. Nobody said there is a pill that could manage this condition and you would not need surgery. Nobody, because everyone who knew had already decided the answer for me. The surgery was on March 14, 2018. Thomas Jefferson University Hospital, Philadelphia. I arrived at 5 in the morning. The preoperative area smelled like antiseptic and cold air. A nurse started an IV in my left hand. An anesthesiologist explained what would happen. I would be unconscious for approximately 9 hours while surgeons removed 35% of my liver from my body and placed it into my father's. My mother hugged me before they wheeled me back. She was crying again. My hero, she whispered into my hair. You are saving his life. I remember the ceiling tiles, white with small perforations. I counted them as the gurney moved down the hallway. 14 tiles from the pre-op area to the operating room. I remember the operating room being cold. I remember the anesthesiologist asking me to count backward from 10. I remember reaching 7. I do not remember the next 14 hours. I woke up in the recovery unit at approximately 7:30 that evening. The first sensation was pressure. An enormous weight on my right side as if someone had placed a boulder on my torso. The second sensation was pain. Not the sharp kind. The deep kind. The kind that lives beneath the surface and radiates outward like heat from an underground fire. A nurse appeared. She checked my vitals. She told me the surgery went well. My father was in a separate recovery room. He was stable. The transplanted liver segment was functioning. I could not speak. My throat was raw from the intubation tube. I could not move. My abdomen was wrapped in bandages and held together with surgical staples. I could not feel the left side of my face because of the position I had been lying in for 9 hours. But I was alive, and my father was alive, and in that moment, that was enough. The recovery was not what anyone had described. 6 to 8 weeks, they said. I was in the hospital for 12 days. The first 5 were spent lying flat because sitting up triggered waves of nausea so severe I vomited bile. The next 3 were spent learning to walk again. 14 steps to the bathroom. 14 steps that took me 20 minutes the first time. At home, the recovery stretched into months. My mother had taken 2 weeks off work to care for me. After 2 weeks, she went back to the flower shop. My father, recovering from his own surgery in the master bedroom, could not help. Craig visited once, brought me a milkshake, and left after 40 minutes. I was largely alone, in pain. In a house where my father was recovering from a surgery he did not need, using a liver he did not need, taken from a daughter who had not been told the truth. At 4 months, the biliary stricture developed. Bile backed up into my bloodstream. My skin turned yellow. My eyes turned yellow. I was readmitted to Jefferson for an ERCP procedure. A scope inserted through my mouth into my bile duct to place a stent. The procedure was performed under conscious sedation, which means I was technically awake for parts of it. I remember gagging. I remember the pressure in my chest. I remember a technician saying, "Almost there." At 8 months, the physical wound had closed, but the pain had settled into permanence. My surgeon, Dr. Catherine Marsh, explained it clinically. Marin, some living donors experience chronic post-operative pain due to nerve damage along the incision site. The nerves were severed during surgery, and while some regenerate, others do not. This may improve over time, or it may become a long-term condition. Long-term condition. A clinical way of saying you will hurt for the rest of your life. I was 23 years old. I had chronic pain. An 11-inch scar. A liver that was regenerating but would never be the same size it was before. And a father who was alive and healthy and who hugged me every time he saw me and said, "You saved my life, Marin. I owe you everything." He owed me the truth, but I would not learn that for another 5 years. The years between the surgery and the discovery were a blur of adaptation. I learned to live with pain the way people learn to live with noise near an airport. You do not stop hearing it. You just stop flinching. I worked as a medical records clerk at a hospital in Scranton. $37,000 a year. A job I chose deliberately because I wanted to understand the system that had processed my surgery. I wanted to see how medical decisions were documented, how referrals were made, how treatment options were presented. I became very good at reading medical charts. Too good. Because the skill I developed at work would eventually lead me to the truth I had been living next to for 5 years, without knowing. My father recovered fully. Within a year of the transplant, he was back at work. Back in the garage on weekends. Back to eating whatever he wanted and complaining about the Eagles and grilling steaks on summer evenings as if nothing had happened. He thanked me regularly. Birthday cards, Christmas dinners, random phone calls. You saved my life, Marin. I never forget that. I accepted the gratitude. I carried the pain. I told myself it was worth it, because my father was alive and that was the whole point. Then on a Saturday morning in September 2023, 5.5 years after the surgery, I went to my parents' house to help my mother clean out the guest room closet. They were converting it into a home office for my father, who had started doing part-time consulting work after retirement. The closet was packed with boxes, old tax returns, holiday decorations, schoolwork from Craig's and my childhood. And in the back corner, behind a stack of Christmas wrapping paper, a cardboard box labeled Dennis Medical. I should not have opened it. I had no reason to suspect anything. I was sorting boxes into keep and donate piles, and the medical box needed to go somewhere. I opened it. Inside were folders, insurance correspondence, hospital bills, pre-surgical evaluations, the documentation of my father's diagnosis, treatment, and transplant. Standard medical records that any patient would keep. But one folder was different. It was thinner than the others. Unlabeled. Tucked between the insurance papers and the hospital bills, as if someone had tried to hide it, but not thoroughly enough. Inside were 3 documents. The first was a treatment recommendation from Dr. Howard Brill, my father's primary care physician, dated October 23, 2017. 3 weeks before my parents told me he was dying. The letter read, "Dear Mr. Holloway, following your diagnosis of primary biliary cholangitis, I recommend initiating treatment with ursodioxycholic acid, ursodiol, at a dosage of 13 to 15 milligrams per kilogram per day. This medication is the standard first-line treatment for PBC and has been shown to slow disease progression and prevent the need for transplantation in the majority of patients." I read it again. Slow disease progression and prevent the need for transplantation. The second document was a cost estimate from the hospital pharmacy. Ursodiol, $1,800 per month. Insurance coverage. Not approved for this diagnosis. Patient responsibility. Full cost. The third document was a handwritten note on my father's personal stationery. His handwriting. Undated. Gail, medication is $1,800/month. We cannot afford that for years. Insurance will not cover it. Marin is a match. Let us go that route. Cheaper in the long run. Cheaper in the long run. My father had written those words. About me. About cutting me open and taking a piece of my liver. Because it was cheaper in the long run than paying for pills. I sat on the floor of my parents' guest room closet holding that note, and I felt something inside me break that had nothing to do with my liver. I did not confront them that day. I could not. The discovery was too enormous to process in real time. It was like finding out the foundation of your house is made of cardboard. You do not start yelling at the builder. You stand very still and try to figure out if the walls are going to collapse. I photographed every document, both sides, every page, uploaded them to my cloud storage, made backup copies on a USB drive I kept in my car. Then I put the originals back in the box, put the box back in the closet, and finished helping my mother clean out the room. She made me lunch afterward. Turkey sandwich, iced tea. She sat across from me at the kitchen table and talked about her garden and the new pastor at church and how my father's consulting work was going. Normal. Everything normal. While my phone held photographs of evidence that my parents had chosen to cut me open rather than pay for medicine, that evening I called the one person I trusted with medical knowledge, my friend, Lauren Kessler. We had gone to high school together. She was now a nurse practitioner at a family practice in Wilkes-Barre. I sent her the photographs of the treatment recommendation and asked, One question. Lauren, if a patient with PBC is recommended ursodiol as first-line treatment and the medication is available but expensive, is it medically appropriate to skip medication and go directly to a living donor transplant? Her response came in 4 minutes. Absolutely not. Ursodiol is the standard of care for PBC. Transplantation is reserved for patients who do not respond to medical therapy or who have progressed to end-stage liver disease despite treatment. Going directly to transplant without attempting medication first is a deviation from every clinical guideline I am aware of. She paused. Then another message. Maren, why are you asking me this? I told her. Everything. The diagnosis, the surgery, the recovery, the chronic pain, the documents I found in the closet. Lauren did not respond for 11 minutes. When she did, her message was 2 sentences. You need a malpractice attorney, and you need one who specializes in informed consent violations. The next morning I called Alan Prescott, a medical malpractice attorney in Philadelphia, whose firm had been recommended by a colleague at the hospital where I worked. His practice focused on surgical malpractice and informed consent failures. I drove to Philadelphia on a Tuesday, sat across from Alan in his office on Chestnut Street, and laid out every document on his conference table. He reviewed them for 30 minutes. When he looked up, his expression was controlled, but his eyes were furious. Maren, let me make sure I understand this correctly. Your father was diagnosed with PBC. His primary care physician recommended ursodiol as first-line treatment. Your parents chose not to pursue medication because of cost. Instead, they had you evaluated as a living liver donor. And at no point during the donor evaluation process were you informed that your father's condition was potentially manageable with medication. That is correct. Were you told that transplantation was the only option? That the waiting list for a deceased donor was too long? That a living donor was his only real chance? Alan set down the documents. Standard informed consent for a living organ donor requires the donor to be informed of all treatment alternatives available to the recipient. If medication was a viable option and you were not told about it, your consent was not informed, and surgery performed without informed consent is not surgery. It is... He paused. We have a case against Dr. Brill for making the referral to the transplant center without ensuring medication was attempted first. We have a case against the transplant center for failing to verify that all non-surgical options had been exhausted. And we have a case against your parents for withholding information that was material to your decision to donate. He opened his laptop. Maren, this is going to be difficult. You are suing your parents and your family doctor, and potentially one of the most respected transplant programs in the country. Are you prepared for that? I have chronic pain every day of my life because my parents decided my liver was cheaper than a prescription. I was prepared the moment I read his handwriting. Alan nodded. Then let us build this. Alan Prescott moved methodically. He was not the kind of attorney who rushed to file. He was the kind who built a case the way an architect builds a bridge. Every support in place, every load calculated, every weakness identified and reinforced before a single car crossed the span. He retained a medical expert, Dr. Nina Vasquez, a hepatologist at Mount Sinai in New York who specialized in primary biliary cholangitis. She reviewed my father's complete medical records, the treatment recommendation from Dr. Brill, the transplant evaluation documents, and my post-surgical records, including the biliary stricture and the chronic pain diagnosis. Her report was 23 pages long. Her conclusion was devastating. The patient, Dennis Holloway, presented with early-stage primary biliary cholangitis at the time of diagnosis. The standard of care for early-stage PBC is initiation of ursodoxycholic acid therapy. The medical literature is unequivocal on this point. Ursodiol is effective in slowing disease progression in the majority of patients, and transplantation is reserved for patients who fail medical therapy or present with advanced disease. She continued. There is no documentation in Mr. Holloway's medical records indicating that ursodiol was prescribed, attempted, or offered to the patient. The referral to the transplant center was made without any trial of first-line medical therapy. This represents a significant deviation from the accepted standard of care. She addressed my situation directly. The living donor, Maren Holloway, was not informed during the donor evaluation process that the recipient's condition was potentially manageable with medication. This omission constitutes a failure of informed consent. A living organ donor has the right to know whether non-surgical alternatives exist for the recipient. Without this information, the donor cannot make a fully informed decision about the risks she is assuming. Dr. Vasquez concluded. In my professional opinion, the living donor transplant performed on March 14, 2018 was medically unnecessary at the time it was performed. The recipient should have been treated with ursodiol first. The donor should have been informed of this option. The failure to do both resulted in an unnecessary major surgery, with lasting physical consequences for the donor. Medically unnecessary. 2 words that rewrote the story of the worst day of my life. Allen filed the malpractice lawsuit on November 1, 2023. Eastern District of Pennsylvania. Holloway v. Brill, Holloway and Thomas Jefferson University Hospital. 3 defendants. Dr. Howard Brill, for deviating from the standard of care by referring my father directly to a transplant center without attempting or recommending medication, for failing to ensure his patient exhausted non-surgical options before a living donor was put at risk. Dennis and Gail Holloway, my parents, for withholding material medical information from a living organ donor, for making a unilateral decision to pursue surgery instead of medication without informing the donor that alternatives existed, for the handwritten note that described their daughter's organ as cheaper in the long run, Thomas Jefferson University Hospital and its transplant program, for failing to independently verify that all non-surgical treatment options had been attempted before accepting a living donor referral, for failing to inform the donor during the evaluation process that the recipient's condition was potentially manageable with medication. The complaint sought damages for surgical battery, failure of informed consent, medical negligence, emotional distress, and chronic physical injury resulting from an unnecessary surgical procedure. Total damages sought: $4.2 million. The lawsuit landed like a bomb in 3 separate locations simultaneously. Dr. Brill retained a medical defense attorney within 48 hours. His initial response through counsel was that the referral to the transplant center was clinically appropriate given the patient's diagnosis. Dr. Vasquez's report disagreed. Publicly, professionally, unequivocally, Jefferson's legal department responded with institutional calm. They stated that the transplant team had relied on the referring physician's assessment of the patient's treatment history and had no reason to believe that first-line therapy had not been attempted. This was technically true and strategically devastating. Jefferson was throwing Dr. Brill under the bus. The transplant center was saying we trusted the referring doctor, and the referring doctor failed to do his job. My parents did not respond through an attorney. They did not retain counsel for 6 weeks. During those 6 weeks, my mother called me 14 times. I did not answer. She left voicemails that ranged from tearful to furious. The first message: Marin, please call me. We can explain everything. The 7th message: this is being blown out of proportion. Your father was sick. That is what families do. The 14th message: if you do not drop this lawsuit, you will never be welcome in this house again. I saved every voicemail. Allen entered them as evidence. The depositions began in February 2024. 3 sessions over 3 weeks. Each one recorded, each one transcribed, each one revealing a layer of the lie that my family had spent 6 years hiding beneath gratitude and thank you cards. Dr. Brill went first. He was 61 years old, gray-haired, nervous. The kind of doctor who had spent 30 years in practice without ever being sued, and was now discovering what it felt like to sit across from an attorney who had read every page of his medical records. Allen's questioning was surgical. Dr. Brill, you diagnosed Dennis Holloway with primary biliary cholangitis in October 2017. Is that correct? Yes. And the standard first-line treatment for PBC is ursodoxycholic acid, correct? That is generally recommended. Did you prescribe ursodiol to Mr. Holloway? Pause. I recommended it. Did you prescribe it? Longer pause. Mr. Holloway indicated that the cost was prohibitive and asked about alternatives. And the alternative you offered was a living donor liver transplant? I referred him to the transplant center for evaluation. The decision to pursue transplant was made by the transplant team. Allen held up the treatment recommendation letter. Dr. Brill, this is your letter dated October 23, 2017. It recommends ursodiol as first-line treatment. It does not mention transplantation as an alternative. At what point did the treatment plan change from medication to surgery? Silence. Dr. Brill, Mr. Holloway came back to me approximately 2 weeks after the initial diagnosis. He said the medication was too expensive, and his insurance would not cover it. He asked if there were other options. I mentioned the possibility of a living donor transplant as a long-term solution. Did you attempt to help him obtain ursodiol through patient assistance programs, manufacturer discounts, or insurance appeals? I may have mentioned those options. Did you document any attempt to help him access ursodiol through any alternative channel? Another pause. I do not believe so. So, the only documented action you took, after diagnosing a treatable condition, was to refer the patient directly to a transplant center, without prescribing or obtaining the recommended medication, without documenting any attempt to make the medication accessible. Dr. Brill's attorney objected. Alan withdrew the question. It did not matter. The point had been made. My parents were deposed together at their attorney's office. My father went first. Alan placed the handwritten note on the table, the note I had found in the closet. 5 lines in my father's handwriting. Mr. Holloway, do you recognize this handwriting? My father looked at the note. Yes, that is mine. Can you read it aloud for the record? Gail, medication is $1,800 a month. We cannot afford that for years. Insurance will not cover it. Marin is a match. Let us go that route. Cheaper in the long run. Alan let the silence sit. Mr. Holloway, when you wrote cheaper in the long run, what did you mean? My father shifted. I meant that the transplant would be a one-time procedure, rather than an ongoing monthly expense. And by cheaper, you were comparing the cost of medication to the cost of your daughter's surgery. It was not about cost. It was about— My father paused. It was about finding the best long-term solution. The best long-term solution was the one you described as cheaper, in your own handwriting. My father's attorney intervened. The witness has answered the question. Alan moved on. Mr. Holloway, at any point before your daughter's surgery, did you inform her that medication was available as a treatment for your condition? No. Did your wife inform her? He looked at my mother. I do not believe so. Did anyone in your family inform Marin that ursodiol could potentially manage your condition without surgery? No. Why not? Because we had already decided to pursue the transplant and we did not want to confuse the situation. Confuse the situation. That was what they called telling your daughter the truth. Confusing the situation. My mother's deposition was shorter. She cried through most of it, but between the tears she confirmed every critical fact. She confirmed that Dr. Brill had recommended medication. She confirmed that they chose not to pursue it because of cost. She confirmed that they did not inform me that medication was an option. She confirmed that the decision was made jointly with my father. Alan asked her one final question. Mrs. Holloway, your daughter has chronic pain as a result of a surgery that your own physician acknowledged was not the first recommended treatment. She has an 11-inch scar. She had a complication requiring an additional procedure. She lives with daily pain. He paused. If ursodiol costs $1,800 a month, and your daughter's surgery has cost her 6 years of chronic pain, would you still describe the transplant as cheaper in the long run? My mother could not answer. She put her head down on the conference table and sobbed. Her attorney called a break. It was the last question of the deposition. It did not need to be answered. The silence answered it. The case settled in June 2024, 8 months after filing. The settlement was reached during a mediation session at a conference center in Philadelphia, overseen by a retired federal judge named Margaret Thornton. All 3 defendants agreed to settle. The terms were as follows. Dr. Howard Brill, settlement payment of $375,000, funded by his malpractice insurance carrier. Additionally, Dr. Brill agreed to complete a continuing medical education course on informed consent and referral protocols. The settlement did not require an admission of wrongdoing, but the terms were reported to the Pennsylvania State Medical Board, which opened a review of his practice. Thomas Jefferson University Hospital. Settlement payment of $1.1 million. The hospital also agreed to implement a revised donor evaluation protocol, requiring independent verification that all non-surgical treatment options have been attempted or offered before a living donor evaluation proceeds. The protocol was named the Holloway Protocol, my name, on a medical protocol designed to protect future donors from what happened to me, Dennis and Gail Holloway. Settlement payment of $240,000. This was the maximum available through their homeowner's insurance umbrella policy. They also agreed to a structured payment plan for an additional $60,000 over 5 years from personal funds. Total settlement, $1.775 million. I sat in the mediation room after the papers were signed. Alan was beside me reviewing the final documents. The retired judge had left. The court reporter was packing up equipment. "How do you feel?" Alan asked. I thought about the question. I thought about the 11-inch scar across my abdomen, the chronic pain that woke me at 3 in the morning, the biliary stricture, the stent procedure, the 8 months of recovery, the 6 years of thanking my father for giving me the privilege of saving his life. "I feel like someone who just learned the price of being the helpful one," I said. Alan nodded. He did not ask me to elaborate. Good attorneys know when words are sufficient. The Holloway Protocol was implemented at Jefferson in September. I attended the announcement ceremony. Dr. Catherine Marsh, the surgeon who had performed my transplant, was there. She approached me afterward. "Marin, I want you to know that when I operated on you, I believed we were following appropriate medical guidance. I trusted the referring physician's assessment." She paused. I should have asked more questions. I should have independently verified that all options had been explored. That failure is mine, and I own it. It was the most honest thing any medical professional had ever said to me. Not an excuse, not a deflection. Accountability. "Thank you," I said, "for saying that." She nodded. "Your protocol will protect people. That matters." My parents' response to the settlement was predictable in its dysfunction. My father's initial reaction delivered through Craig was that I had destroyed the family for money. He said this without irony. The man who had chosen to cut open his daughter because medication was too expensive accused her of being motivated by money. My mother sent a letter. 2 pages. Half apology. Half self-justification. The kind of letter that says, "I am sorry you feel that way," instead of, "I am sorry for what I did." "We made the best decision we could with the information we had," she wrote. "Your father was scared. I was scared. We did not think clearly." They thought clearly enough to write a note, calculating the cost comparison. They thought clearly enough to choose surgery over medication. They thought clearly enough to never mention ursodiol to the daughter they were asking to lie down on an operating table. Fear does not erase accountability, and clarity is not the same as innocence. Craig called me once after the settlement. Brief, uncomfortable. The conversation of a man who had been standing in the corner his entire life and was now being asked to account for his silence. "I should have said something, Marin." "Yes, you should have." I did not know everything, but I knew enough. Knowing enough and saying nothing is the same as knowing everything and choosing silence. He did not call again. It has been a year since the settlement. I am 28 years old. I live in a 1-bedroom apartment in Scranton that I chose because it has large windows that let in morning light and a kitchen big enough to cook meals I actually enjoy instead of meals I was assigned to prepare. I still have chronic pain. Some days are tolerable, others are not. I take ibuprofen and use a heating pad and do physical therapy exercises 3 times a week. I see a pain management specialist every 2 months. I will likely do these things for the rest of my life. The 11-inch scar has faded from red to silver. It curves across my right side like a river on a map. I used to hide it. Long shirts, high-waisted pants, swimsuits I never wore. Now I let it show. Not because I am proud of it. Because hiding it means accepting that what happened should be invisible. And it should not. I left my job at the hospital records department. I used part of the settlement to go back to school. I am enrolled in a pre-law program at the University of Scranton. I want to become a patient advocate attorney, someone who fights for people whose consent was not informed, whose choices were not choices, whose bodies were used as solutions to problems they were never told about. Dr. Brill's practice is under review by the Pennsylvania State Medical Board. The outcome is pending. Whatever happens to his license, the Holloway Protocol at Jefferson will outlast his career. Every living donor evaluated at that hospital will now be independently informed of all treatment alternatives available to the recipient before consenting to surgery. My body was the cost of that protocol. I wish it had not been. But if my scar prevents even one person from being cut open unnecessarily, then the pain carries something beyond itself. Not meaning exactly. Purpose. My parents and I do not speak. The settlement included no requirement for contact or reconciliation. The silence between us is not empty. It is full of things my father wrote in a note he thought nobody would ever read. full of things my mother cried about in a deposition room while confirming she had known the truth and hidden it, full of a brother who sat in the corner and said nothing because saying something would have required courage he did not have. I do not hate them. Hatred requires an ongoing relationship with the source of your pain, and I have severed that connection. What I feel is something quieter, something that does not have a name in English. The recognition that the people who raised you valued your organs more than your autonomy, that the love they offered was conditional on your willingness to be useful, that the family you trusted calculated the cost of your body against the cost of a prescription and chose the option that was cheaper in the long run. My grandmother, on my mother's side, who died before any of this happened, used to say something I think about every day. She said, "Marin, never give so much of yourself that there is nothing left to live with." I thought she was talking about generosity. She was talking about survival. If you are still listening, let me leave you with this. I gave my father 35% of my liver. I gave him 9 hours on an operating table. I gave him 8 months of recovery. I gave him 6 years of chronic pain. I gave him the most intimate part of my body because he said he would die without it. He would not have died. He needed a pill, an $1,800 a month pill that his insurance did not cover and his budget could not comfortably absorb. And instead of finding a way to pay for that pill, or applying for assistance, or appealing the insurance decision, or enrolling in a clinical trial, my parents looked at their daughter and saw a cheaper option. If someone asks you to sacrifice your body for them, ask questions. Ask every question. Ask the questions they do not want you to ask. Ask for second opinions from doctors they did not choose. Ask to see the medical records they do not want you to see. Ask why surgery is necessary when medication might work. Ask why you were not told about alternatives. Because the people who love you should never need your organs. They should need your presence, your kindness, your laughter, your time. If they need a piece of your body, make sure they have exhausted every other option first. Make sure the decision is yours. Fully informed, freely made, with no handwritten notes comparing the cost of your flesh to the cost of a pill. Your body is not a budget line item. Your organs are not a family resource. And love that requires surgery is not love. It is accounting. Thank you for listening to my story. If it meant something to you, if it reminded you that your body belongs to you and your consent must be earned, not assumed, share it, like, subscribe. Leave a comment telling me what you would have done. Because everyone deserves to know the full truth before they give a piece of themselves away, and nobody, not even a parent, has the right to make that decision for you.